extensive reformation, spiritual revolution, nine 24 2811, potential rebirth of passion. Schopenhauer and Nietzsche were among the first few philosophers I grew accustomed to learning from during my late youth and early adulthood. One can see I read voraciously now, but the personal sentiment I have withheld for those two philosophers are among the most special, personal, and imminent. August 2011. Jake Batterley's art is ineffable, a radical deposition of esoteric wealth and complicated symbolism, something I've for so much time desired to personally represent as well, though I'm so humbled in the presence of this master. Very relative and communicative thoughts, ideas, however. I'm enjoying his spirit, mind, and art very much. September 2011. Everything significant or deep seems related in a way. So many of the books I have read, I find instruction within, and likewise solace. Studying from Hobbes, Hegel, Schopenhauer, and such, it appears to bring a much better, greater, albeit more personal preparation in communicating relating with fellow subjects, so that a golden age of philosophy or of advanced thinking is not so far off as it seems to me, although it is evidently apprehended within the dimensions of the mind. I do this for the Western spirit seems inevitably transfigured and determined to evaporate within some centuries' time. The course seems unalterable, so personal meditation and ethical conduct toward the universe really will be my only and final salvation. September 2011. I've always remained tempted to find a means to get whatever other fellow humanity around me to think and reflect upon certain individual ideas that pose a threat and are likely a disease to the structure and foundation of the existence of a first world civilization within the West. I see that a lot of my worrying concern involves finding a way to halt and reverse that process of decay and destruction, so that my home, for the remainder of my conceptions and lives, will not become beyond polluted, unbearable, or unlivable, so that rescue and deliverance will still possibly be achieved. September 2011. I enjoy the Ewig's Reich video posted on YouTube right now. The sound is so very dark, ambient, it seems so transcendent of number, reason, and human-conceived structure, which creates a very mystical and spiritual atmosphere, closer to what the heavens likely imagine. I watched as well the link to the British oak becoming fallen. Such action does make me think of the despicable nature of conduct that this generation of mankind has disintegrated into. Such action is so very decadent and disappointing. There's such a powerfully mechanical scheme and system established now, as it is in the postmodern West. All the bureaucracy and administrative policies seemingly impossible for ourselves and our kind, as truthful Puritan thinkers, to penetrate and reverse such progressive liberalism and egalitarian stupidity. It seems only a matter of time when the damages of such relaxed foreign policy blur the very cosmopolitan idea of a first world civilization, where all the economy, the markets, the social hierarchy, the structure becomes debased, decayed, and in ruins. None but a lowest common class denominator of human spirit reign within the enfeebled and deceased clutches of all that once was great, noble, and creative. A genuine and magnanimous character has become so very rare in this age. My only thought right now is, will we develop and advance a spectrum of thinking and idealism that has become dormant and asleep over the past for so many years, for such incessant self-affirmation and petty aims have clouded and obscured all the noble intentions within the spirit of the West. I would enjoy so much once again to find that ideological passion and fire that I once possessed, with the help that was once with a now long-lost friend, and would be so indebted and grateful, as otherwise this life and fire would lay at rest within a tomb of eternal darkness. September 2011. 10/1/2011. Externalization of the spirit. I make the observation now that I have studied, learned, and experienced more than I personally. I don't know if another person of my kind has journeyed through this process, though it is probable, had underwent a spiritual transformation of character, and by this I mean that a profound withdrawal into internal subjectivity had occurred, for life all around me was seemingly perishable, gone, guilt-ridden, and oblivious to whatever kind of construction, creation, and improvement in regard to the evolution of the human race. I read from Bertrand Russell, although for the most part I recognize his philosophy as otherwise resentful of all that is idealistically valuable, profound, that prior to the Hellenistic age in antiquity, during more or less the age of Aristotle, and earlier before, with pre-Socratic philosophers especially, that the general atmosphere of thought and intellectual discussion was more or less externally driven, promising, capable. There was a potential toward radical change and to generate powerful, philosophically driven, intelligible monarchies, aristocracies, and such during the age of the Greek city-states. But as the population of rural towns became more urban, developed, integrated with a greater quantity of mass people, that Alexander's conquest shaped and advanced the groundwork toward lesser genuine thoughts and lesser universal creativity, then it was only a matter of time when the seeds and germs of cynicism, skepticism, stoicism, and such fostered enough mana toward the conception of Christianity. And since I'm aware I'm skipping through vast portions of historical time, since its conception and integration into the Roman Empire, there seems to have been a complete unraveling and unfolding of the kind of withdrawal and isolated sentiments that characterized the state of the West as what it was to become, and has arisen through enough time to this day, and that of what I myself have had experienced back during 5 or so years ago, mistakenly, seemingly, helplessly transfigured, as I now am convinced, and that state was advanced within me purely because of the lack of potential subjects of vigor, health, and genius to correspond with. Everything became bleak, as the rarity and uncommonness of finding a like-minded individual on the master's side of the universal spectrum was seemingly an impossibility, or rather a grandiose fantasy. I remember reading much about the New World Order prior to my fated withdrawal. It is certainly a tremendous unlikely scheme that I despise and evade, due to that institution's dislike and contempt for everything natural, environmentally oriented, and philosophically profound. It is like communism, a global domination of monotonous, slave-yielding government, though in a veiled form, for sure something necessary to eradicate if the fate and destiny of diverse ideas in regard to nationality, culture, and spirits are to be preserved. I live in America, in California particularly, for the most part a very dismal and loathsome area. Fortunately, I have moved recently to a mountainous area nearby, full of pine forests and snow in the winter. The great change in setting. Snow in Southern California seems so hard to come by. I tend to regard myself as more Eastern European rooted, Polish and Slavish in particular, rather serious and grave, as Hüner, who has to have been who is he to have been in the Nordic pantheon, in the Nordic mythology way? Who is he to have been? Who's been asked, right? Who's been asked in the Nordic pantheon way, right? Find a soul to someone's final, and ask in the Nordic pantheon way, who is to have been Surrector in the Celtic pantheon mythology way. So therefore, ask who in the Nordic mythology name title appellation way is the final. Therefore, Hüner has been asked in the Nordic mythology name title appellation way, find a soul to someone is final. And therefore, who has to have been Surrector, right? In the Celtic mythology, name title appellation way, final alter so, and there's that final. And therefore, rather serious and grave, as Surrector, his family has much ancestry from Poland and all of Czechoslovakia. I regard myself as more biologically similar to Surrector, who has to have been asked, right? Who's been asked. For the time being, as such, in the name title appellation, as such, to get that in mind as such as well too, as such the mind is the far. There exists also some German and Irish roots in my lineage, mostly coming from Embla, right? Right. Though in the German, yes, but Nordic mythology way, right? The German Nordic mythology way, in the Nordic mythology way, though idealistically I tend to give most unwavering support and homage to Central Europe, purely for aesthetic reasons, regard to the greatness that it once was, especially tracing my interest into the 19th century era of German philosophy and culture, Schopenhauer, Hegel, Wagner, Nietzsche, Schumann, etc. But of course this is only absolute homage. Many other nations and historical epochs spark my interest. Antiquarian Greece, Antiquarian Greece, Rome, Egypt, Babylonia, Sumer, India, China, Atlantis even, as well as the general vicinity and proximity of the West throughout the Dark Ages, Middle Ages, Renaissance, etc. I feel by the time of the French Revolution that a profound demarcation had changed and altered the rise and progression of modern Europa. It was with every moment afterward that the West, in modern terms, was beginning to fall ever further into what eventually will undoubtedly become a third world state, culture and economy, within probably a few more centuries. September 25, 2011. I have possessed within me a rather powerful desire for order and authority, some of the concepts that the ordinary common man fears and resents, especially when he is found amassed in a group of his fellow herdsmen during his democratic rallies for whatever base sentiments opposed and ordered against all higher, greater, and more noble spirits and ideas, which authority and true order more or less represents. I withdrew from my reflection and contemplated much spirituality, internal dreams and visions, things that are actualized and take place in a much deeper world, certainly not in regard to the epoch in time that I was to have at present been stationed within at all. I think that this escape into the inner recesses of the mind was for sure a mistake. However inevitable it was to proceed, for like I stated earlier, out in the vast intellectual wilderness of this world, there was all of a sudden not a single soul worthy enough of my ideological level to reciprocate, communicate, and converse within a friendly, mutual, and supportive dialectic, one that would create a good progression, development, and advancement of true, real, and paternalistic, orderly ideals. I don't mean to dwell too much on ideas such as this, but for a time in my life I did in fact possess a friend, worthy enough and well-suited enough in his ideological state and condition to become considered truly a friend, ally, and kinsman of mine, and I noticed now that it was after his fated separation from me, that is when he was ordered to depart onward with his career in the military, that with the intellectual and social spectrum that I was thence onward placed within, where none of my closest contacts bore any resemblance to that degree of nobility and virtue that I looked for and desired to conquest, and all the cosmopolitan appearances and manifestations were full of that liberalism and egalitarian stupidity that I was striven to escape from, and create something very great and onerous in order to banish and evaporate those very traces that stupefying liberality. It is from that destined historical moment that I was determined to lose and truly descend into another world of true darkness and morbidity. A psychological, philosophical poverty of thought and speech developed due to this new need of an archaic restructure, reformation of every part of my general character, in order to combat and destroy, however placidly, with words or ideas, with true material weaponry and swordsmanship, which were some of the things that I felt a predilection to practice over time. This very vast, tremendous, and hostile, brave new world that I was by necessity fallen and conceived within, in a seemingly absolute solitary and exiled condition as it was soon to have become. It was that before years would pass that I truly tore apart from those very clutches in the slow and massive enslavement of philosophical, political profundity, and pure obscurity that actualized the very state and condition of my character for such a seemingly incessant quantity of time. Since more or less the end of 2010, or the beginning of 2011, I have been willing and intending for so much better, with a greater coherence, clarity, and pure intention of thought, desire, and intellect. It seems that it was hereon that I slowly came to the right conclusion that I did not need that friend of mine in order to maintain and preserve an external, sociably active, and ontologically alive spirituality to begin with. It was only due to the notion that I had not yet experienced such a travesty and plethora of profound experience, such as that departure into nothingness and absolute solitude, that I hadn't understood as of yet that there was not any need to withdraw into a state of internal spirituality, or to become a hermit practicing rigorous, narrow-minded asceticism within a frame of scope of a very limited, non-universal perspective. Such doctrines as temptation to improve and evolve the knowledge of the world, the human race within it, remain vital and ever significant to me, due to the fact that I have recognized everything within this world as still of one consciousness, and in order for my course of soul and its rebirths and reformations to find a true paradise, Here upon this earth, most especially, I would need to project outward onto the surface of the world, attempt to improve and evolve the nature and the knowledge of the human race, as it seems truly vital and important to do so. If the world, in particular the West, is not to descend into a vast third world slum of universal poverty, of knowledge, tradition, and wealth, which if such a thing were to happen, I do not understand how my race and its family were ever to survive, and thus would it necessitate the death and true end of my spirit, which is something I do not desire any longer to perceive to take place, due to the fundamental development and change taken place in my character over the course of these past few months. In any event, it is stated that I wonder if mankind is worth it. Personally, I have many times given thought to this statement on my own. There are so many examples available, especially more as this age and epoch succeeds, that certainly afford the knowledge of thinking the subject the validity of this expression. As for myself, sometimes the insanity and depravity of my fellow humanity becomes so astonishing that I again feel drawn to a state of isolation, quietude, and depression. For humanity seems very well at times more disease than a cure, perhaps an object of its own annihilation, rather than something to preserve, as though he were thought to contain some degree of enlightening value or everlasting aesthetic. I continue to fight for his sake, however, as I keep in mind the vast enormous spectrum of the eternities, not the times, knowing that the change of the state or the subject into golden ages of prosperity and philosophical wealth, an age greater than that of Pericles, is indubitably possible, and totally capable of becoming achieved, regardless if it is so that the earth needs to endure a complete annihilation and destruction of almost all substantial life, only for the succession and evolution of this life to create once again and reconceive that very essential and untiring nature of the will of the world that more or less determines to conceive humanity, mankind, time and time again. Right, very much so, in regard to every value, moral aim and goal becoming turned on its head, rather an inversion and juxtaposition of all convention, tradition, morality, and virtue has occurred, or at least so due to the long inexhaustive invention and indoctrination of the Western world with the dubiousness of Christian morality that has of all such time proceeding through the historical epochs of the civilized Teutonic Hyperborean West, eventually decimated and degenerated all natural intention and virtue that once was found honorable to this very unique kind of subject. The question seems, is it or is it not for this man deserving of the slave resentment that represents Christian morality? This northern spirited race was so free and abolished during antiquity, and was only very recently persuaded to adopt such a hastily new, unprepared, and untested custom as that of the chief slave morality of the West, Christianity. I've understood for quite some time the reality of the master-slave dialectic, the strife and struggle between an aristocratic nobleman versus the utilitarian proletariat. The conflict and contrastation of time seems inevitable, though it is likewise a hopeful thing to consider that everything appears in cycle. However, the time when the lord or nobleman reigns in a state of true freedom from criticism or resentment is in truth invariably shorter than when the time of the slave or commoner reigns in a freedom from rightful repression or hushed silence. Anyhow, it is true I was born in America, in abomination, in Helheim, in abomination, initially in Hell realm, in abomination, in Hell realm, in abomination, initially in a rather surprisingly good area in the southwest, but when I was still a young child, my family and I moved to a town still in the southwest. However, over time I had the opportunity to perceive every aspect around me slowly becoming more and more degenerate and filthy. As wave after wave of unnaturalized immigration, most of them entirely resentful and hateful of the white man himself, eventually transformed for the worse and destroyed all sense of community and friendship with myself and my people. As it may be known, I moved recently to a better area up in the mountainous forests, still in the southwest. However, it is by far an easy thing to understand the very vermin-like intentions and hostile, volatile sentiments these people have for America and Canada, and I know that within a few centuries, given the pathetic and sterile morality of the typical defenseless politician in America, or the typical American in general, that the white man is undoubtedly become eliminated, lost, and destroyed, and whatever other races shall thrive abundantly, however, without any notion or conception of what to maintain or preserve in regard to the greatness and splendor that once eclipsed and represented the state of the American West. unity is so profound an idea, and creates for whatever subject a healthy, strong state of mind, willing to fight for something greater and deeper than the typical shallow desire and narcissistic egoism that the common man of this time strives to preserve. October 1, 2011. 10/8/2011. Magic record. Return. Master, stand firm upon the altar of golden cloth. Forget perception. Final attention to the abysmal pit. Behold the satanic kingdom. At last, discard interest of warrior detail. Hush fear and curiosity below. Once upon realms of ideal apprehension. Exclusive comprehension of the master's character. Denial of fainted of destiny. Fear of tremendous will. Consummation of Holy Spirit. Totality speaks. Representation of human divine form. Fair-sighted visions. Solemn understanding of the past actuality. Potential future. Majestic perpetuity. Cyclical rationality. 3 times creation and destruction. Exile and isolation into vials of obscurity. Defeat of Kaiser's permanence. Lively visions turn to toxic dust, for fear of eternal ruins. Formidable, thorough re-evaluation of the soul. Are you at all everlasting? Questions divide into the black massive circle. Stone transformation of thanksgiving countenance. Your death, is it necessary? Possibility of immortality remains, so long as sin preserves. Do you shout for sin, or cry for love? All shall ultimately perish. Inevitably, erosion of stone by titanic will of the intellectual principle of water. Eternity of water. Infinity. Inescapable submission and acceptance. For love is most difficult to conquest. Once sublimated, welcome the wisdom of God. Spiritual annihilation and found communion. Reluctant repentance and embraced salvation. In fearful chasms of foremost sterility. Life and mundane mediocrity. Vanity and boredom. Time succeeds. Consecration manifests. Once more, ancient stairs of unknown procession. October 8th, 2011. 10/8/2011 on reality and dream. It seems true that there is a need for something great, clear, and mysterious to generate within the cosmic ideological spectrum of the West of mankind. Ideas of grandeur, remoteness, and spirituality, in a vast degree, are likely dormant within the interior of the Occidental collective scheme. However, like a rare chemical, they lie in wait to become ignited, a spontaneous awakening, a universal discovery of profound truths, or merely of innovations guided by a sword, however consisting of peculiar thoughts, though of fundamentally referential character. When, in writing, desiring to extol certain elements from vast depth may sometimes occur with radically mysterious results, a subject of a human philosophical nature commences for time its potential nature to purely reason as reality. And as I know that this within my own case, I have eventually come across various mysterious ideas while practicing this theorem. It seems that, as is the course of this train of thought, that first of all this phenomenal reality that appears before my material eyes, as I perceive it, that presents itself accordingly through such things as sound and touch and such, rendered possible to perceive through the universal nature of my organism, that it is in truth may belong to myself, to reason myself solipsistic and egoistically. However, as my fundamental nature, that is my subject, presupposes reflection, outward from my spirit, perceived physically by my physiological senses and perceptions, that this reality of mine, with my reflection that represents my external world, presupposes objectivity of the will, that, therefore, it is of fundamental importance that I must attempt to understand whether the subjectivity of my will contains my inner will in itself and by itself, independent of my subjective nature and experience. As though if my will were to somehow perish, evaporates itself, or simply cease existing, I inquire thereupon into the question of riddle whether or not the objectivity of my will would cease and eliminate itself with myself, or rather continue to go on existing as it were beforehand and a priori. Nonetheless, the solution to this question lies in various positions and accounts. I think if my spirit were to suddenly cease being, that my organism were to become deceased, and again looking into the fundamentally mysterious and spiritual nature of the world, of reality and of what is transcendent from appearance, that if for vast portions of my life here upon this earth were full of weightiness, heaviness, and gravity, of whatever nature or morality I would bear responsibility, that it would seem likely that my will was not enlightened enough during its lifetime, and that the heaviness of it would likely continue to keep it down, rooted in the soil and nature of the earth, that a potential delivery from its substance into the hull of the creator would not take place, and then would occur a psychosis of memory, and in more or less altered and transformed character would my will once again regenerate and reform into the realm of physical matter. It seems that the will of God fundamentally alters the shape and form of the character when upon the subject's release back into the realm and wilderness of physical matter. Accordingly, through enough studious experience from learned, spiritually loved men, and with whatever satisfying amounts of personal meditation that yields certain positive answers to ascertain this question, it seems that every form or object of will within the realm of matter is made manifest in existence within a vast and enormous cycle, determined by grade and degree in a pyramid-like structure. It follows necessarily that these forms may get their transition from divergent form to divergent form throughout a subject's phenomenal experience within the principle of its life and its time. The classical elements, such that represent fire, water, air, and earth, incarnate themselves within the various grades of the will's existence. The same goes for numerological representation, ideally understood by the numbers from 1 through 10, 11, as a subject of a particular nature of man becomes deceased, that it was a death not intended for absolute annihilation, so that it were to become realized once again within a form of matter. Let us say the subject of a man. It is as though that all the certain grounds of his life were to thereupon his death become remembered and remunerated, and if various amounts of these grounds must lead to further consequences, as is the case with our imagined man, it is here that these consequences that are occurring during the transition of his deceased form to his renewed form, thereupon shape and determine the fundamental representation, body, organism, and character and such, of this new subject. It follows to acknowledge that he would now become a woman, if the various grounds from his past deceased form were to have become determined by consequence in such and such a way. Perhaps if he were cruel to a woman in his past deceased form, thus logically shall he experience now what it is to behave in the nature of a woman, likely to experience a justifiable degree of cruelty of man upon her, in order for her spirit to comprehend just what it was that this subject's past life as a man was transmitting or projecting onto whatever portion of woman. Our man, as we backtrack to his transition from his old form to his new one, would, if the ground of his past life yielded the proper consequences, become a bird of some sort, say a sparrow, if his ontological nature were that of something refined and high-spirited, but not given to depth or gravity. It seems that the nature of a bird of this kind would be placed on the philosophical hierarchy, and somewhere near the dimension of final evaporation or annihilation of the will. However, as this bird remains an animal, they therefore cannot labor enough mana, reason, or meditation to bring about a final, lasting, quieted state of the will. In any event, this man could likely become a ground animal, such as a wolf or a lion, if again whatever certain grounds of his past determine his future nature to become this way. It is said that the stupidest man descended to the realm of fishes, but it is also said that rather that the highest subjects upon the creative hierarchy and hierarchy of the universal philosophical pyramid is man alone, that the quantity of even this grade is experienced spiritual sublimation or annihilation of the will is possessed of by a very few proportion, but it is such sway he is bestowed every now and then among his gene with a tremendous ability to contemplate God's ideas objectively, while being beyond the realm of good and evil, or of subjective sentiments. I feel at times that the nature of the world is composed such a way that man is the final testament of the world, for the very reason that I myself am a man. Therefore, all relations and connective associations, as they become transfigured through the channels of time, have come about and developed accordingly. If I am to think this way, it is as though I shall need to deny the very possibility of life independent of my own will, therefore slip very likely into a world where all reflection and objectification contain no more than a fantastic illusion, grandiose scheme within the will of a very solitary, lifeless, helpless subject. To become convinced of such an idea will likely generate a very great madness within enough time. However, the answer to this question remains unresolved, as the reality of this world being no more than a dream or not cannot ever be understood as so long as one remains alive. For all the time a subject is alive, can he only remain trapped physically and spiritually within his own body, therefore cannot venture to guess with enough evidence whether the life outside of him is a phantom or a reality. October 8th, 2011.